The Call of the Silver Hills. The Silver Hills waited like a secret at the edge of the world, their slopes catching the moonlight and tossing it back like coins. In the valley below, the city of Lorven thrummed with ordinary life. Carts creaked, spices perfumed the alleys, children chased one another between stalls, and the river that fed the town sang the same small song it had sung for 100 generations. Lena moved among that hum like someone who belonged to the hidden corners, not the open squares. She knew every crooked roof and every merchant's favorite hour. She had learned to keep her hands quick and her face calm. Orphaned when she was small, she had been taken in by old Varon, the spice seller, and given a life measured in handfuls of saffron and tiny wrists of pepper. It was a life that taught her steady work and soft patience, but it did not teach the thing she craved most, a place in the world that felt like a choice rather than an accident. Eris, the crow, had been her friend since before she could remember. He perched on her shoulder in the market, watching the world with sharp black eyes and delivering small wonders, a lost ring, a ribbon, a whispered rumor folded in a scrap of paper. He understood the cadence of her voice as clearly as any human. People laughed when they saw Lena talk to a bird. Lena did not mind. Eris had the kind of loyalty that does not ask for explanations. When Marin arrived with his dark cloak and stories of the north, his words struck the quiet of Lorven like a bell. He spoke of mountains that rose white as bone, of animals that walked and talked with a kind of dangerous wisdom, and of a spring hidden among silver rocks that answered true needs but punished greed. His voice was low and certain, a voice that fashions belief out of air. For many in the square, his tale was the sort of entertainment that fades with the rush of bread and beer. For Lena it was an ember. She had been watching the river that day, thinking of how the current carried away scraps and left the stones clean. The idea of a thing that could change life quietly, simply filled her with a terrible hope. She had never considered herself brave. She had, however, always been restless. Restlessness says more than courage sometimes. It is a hunger with the patience to bide its time. Lena began to prepare without quite admitting it. She gathered what she could, a thin cloak, a small knife, a handful of dried figs, and a map inked in the margins of an old ledger. She told no one, though Eris noticed. Eden joined her on the road by accident and answered her call by chance. He was the blacksmith's son, his shoulders already broad for a boy of 17, hair scorched lighter at the ends from standing too close to the forge. Eden's strength was obvious. So was his readiness to shape himself around expectation. He believed, with a simplicity that was almost religious, that hard work would be rewarded. That belief can be a good thing and a dangerous one. It meant he would walk into storms for the promise of gold. It also meant he could be blinded, sometimes, by the idea that merit always precedes reward. Bray the dog came with them as well, limping on knees that had once been used to fight alongside men. His coat was silvered with age, his muzzle bore white like frost. Bray had once been a soldier's dog and had seen the sharp, bright face of battle close up. Where Eden carried a young man's surety, Bray carried the patient weariness of one who had loved and lost and learned not to make the same mistakes twice. He listened more than he spoke. When he moved, the earth seemed to remember why he was trusted. Their first days outside Lorven were simple enough: a map, a compass made from an old spoon, nights beneath stars and mornings of aching feet. The land remembered quiet footsteps, the forest held its breath at their passing. They traded stories around a modest fire. Lena told them about the market stalls, the secret of rubbing cinnamon between thumb and forefinger to test its age. Eden spoke of hammering iron until it sang. Bray offered only small, old anecdotes of loyalty and lost masters. The differences between them were not immediately a cause for conflict. They were, rather, the chords by which they could be measured. Marin's warnings, though told to others as a legend, slowly became a map of the heart for Lena. The spring answers true needs, he had said, but it is nothing for the greedy. The phrasing stayed with her. In dreams she pictured the spring like a well of glass, and in waking hours she learned to recite the phrase as if it were a prayer. It steadied her. The forest was not dramatic at first. It was patient. It taught them to notice small things, the way a raven ruffled when rain approached, the sound of water trickling under roots, the tracks of animals that passed in the night. When the first real danger came, a sudden stampede of boars sent down a steep ridge, it was the years of Lorvan's crowded market that saved Lena from panicking. She moved the way she had always moved, swift, unseen, picking the right moment to step. Eden's strength carried them through the storm. Bray's old reflexes found cover and guided them to safety. When they sat by the river afterward, shivering and with hair plastered to their heads, they laughed not because they were unafraid but because they had not been alone in fear. As the miles grew and mountains rose in the distance like the teeth of a sleeping giant, doubts came to Eden like a chill that creeps through boots. The idea that this journey would reward him, that sacrifice equaled return, burned thin. He had worked in the forge watching other men take riches and never questioning whether those riches were always deserved. Now the promise of the spring, wrapped in Marin's stories, began to look to Eden less like salvation and more like destiny, a destiny where he would finally stand taller than the son of a poor smith. Bray watched Eden carefully, comfortable with his silence. Dogs see patterns in behavior the way old men see seasons, changing and sure. Bray did not much like the way Eden's jaw tightened when they spoke of the spring. He could smell greed in the air like the metallic scent before a storm. Lena, for her part, felt the strange, heavy shift. She wanted the spring, yes, but she wanted it for something that did not belong to her alone. The difference between wanting a thing and wanting it for the right reason would be the line that split the path. And then the betrayal unfolded not as a thunderclap but as something softer and crueler. One night Eden could not sleep. His dreams had been full of coin and praise. In the quiet hours, he rose and fumbled with rope. He tied Lena, clumsy with shame and desperation, not with malice so much as with a belief that he could shape the story in his favor if he acted quickly. He begged Bray to come with him, to leave the old dog the weight of the tie and the memory. Bray's refusal was patient, and that refusal released a pressure inside Eden that he mistook for danger. He fled. Eris, who had taken to sleeping lightly on Lena's shoulder, pecked at the knots until they slackened. Lena slipped free, moving like a shadow because she had no other option. She chased the sound of hurried feet, and the path led deeper into the mountain's throat, into caverns where water sang against stone. The spring lay in a hollow like a bowl, and when she saw it she understood the mixture of beauty and menace. The water burned with a pale light and breathed like a slow animal. Eden reached for it, desperate and swift. The moment his fingers broke the surface, the mountain spoke back. Stone does not weep, but Eden's face froze in the absurd angle of someone who had reached for a prize and found a mirror that told the truth of his intention. His body hardened like a statue, an ending that made the breath leave the lungs in a stunned silence. Lena reeled, a horror that tasted like cold iron, and yet in that moment the clarity came to her like sunrise. The spring was not a tool to be seized but a mirror of the heart. It answered the ask, and it did so with terrible exactness. For a second the idea of turning back on the wish the whole city might need whispered through her. Why not ask for power, for riches that could lay waste to want? She could see herself on a raised dais, the town's savior made visible. The thought was human and sharp. Instead she thought of the faces she had known since childhood, old Varen's hands stained with spice, the baker's child who laughed with no shoes in winter, the tired rowers who mended nets with speech like prayers. She chose something that could not be held in a fist, the quiet, steady wish that the city should never hunger again, that its wells would not run dry. Her voice in the cave was small, not because the wish was small but because she had learned that true largeness sits quietly. The spring accepted, and it answered without spectacle. There was a warmth that rose through Lena's chest and didn't feel like reward but rather like a settling. When they walked back toward Lorven, the path seemed at once the same and utterly changed. Birds sang with a note that sounded like approval. The return home was not triumphant with gold or dramatic pageantry, it was the soft, certain movement of water returning to its bed. Stories, as they always do, grew around the simple truth. Fields at the city's edge seemed to yield more grain, the river that threaded Lorven brimmed with fish again, the well in the marketplace no longer ran dry in the hottest days. People noticed these small miracles and could not say why. Lena watched them and kept the secret of the spring to herself, not because she lacked pride but because sometimes the greatest pride is a quiet thing that refuses to be shouted. Eden remained as a statue in the cave for a long while, a caution carved into the stone. When the townsfolk finally brought moss and vines over him, they told his story with a kind of pity that was sharp as a blade. They spoke of how greed can freeze a man's heart and how the urge to take before understanding can turn dreams into a grave. Bray grew older in the city, his nights full of rest and his days full of respect. He would lie near the river and watch the children play, and sometimes he would close his eyes as if counting those who had passed and those who remained. Eris continued to trouble the market with small thefts of heart-shaped bread crusts and with the occasional gossip he would scatter for Lena's amusement. Old Varan kept his stall, more cheerful now that his spice sacks were never quite as bare. Lena never rode on a gilded throne and never saw a crown set upon her head. Some nights she would cross the bridge and stand by the river, listening to the water's slow speech. She carried the memory of the mountain as one carries a talisman, not to flaunt but to remember a rule: when you ask, answer first. She would teach children at dusk how to read the sky for weather and how to mend a net. She would explain, in passing, that the true riches are often the ones that nourish more than one's stomach. People sometimes asked if the spring had changed the world because they wanted a simpler, grander answer. Lena would only smile and say, "Things change when we choose to care for each other." It is small language for a vast truth, but the small language fits the small work that shapes the world, taking a bowl of porridge to the neighbor, fixing a cracked wheel, keeping watch through a bad night. The city learned, slowly, the difference between taking and tending. In time, the tale of the Silver Hills passed into the song of the valley as all true stories do. Children pointed to the low field where the crops rose thickest and dared one another to go find the mountain spring. Mothers used the story to keep young hands from reaching too hastily for what was not theirs, and old men told it in the late hour with a kind of good sorrow in their voice. Each telling shaped the memory a little. Sometimes Lena was younger, sometimes braver, sometimes wiser. Eden's statue was a warning. Bray's rest was a benediction. Eris's chatter became the soundtrack of market mornings. If there is a single thing to be learned from how this story unfolded, it is simply this: power without care is a blade that cuts its holder, wishes confined to selfishness harden like stone. Lena's choice was not flamboyant, it did not demand songs of victory or the gleam of medals. But the slow, steady life that followed, the nourishment, the mornings where no child went to bed with an empty belly, that was the true answer the spring offered. The spring did not give power to the greedy, it reflected the better part of those who came with open hands. And so the Silver Hills kept their secret, and Lorven lived on, its people more careful now with what they asked. Lena grew older, but not bitter. Her contentment was not the loud contentment of conquest, but a quieter kind. She would sometimes visit the edge of the hills with Eris on her shoulder, and the crow would caw into the wind as if addressing old friends. Gray slept in the shade, and children rolled in fields that were once dust. The city learned the lesson the hard way: give your wish a purpose beyond yourself, and the world might just answer. Thank you for your attention. If you liked the story, please like and subscribe. It motivates us to make new videos and helps us promote the channel. Thank you.